Ethan Monroe, a wealthy executive with everything money can buy, finds himself stranded on a lonely country road, where he's unexpectedly helped by a young boy who asks for nothing in return. This simple act of kindness plants a seed in Ethan's heart, leading him to question everything he thought he valued. Drawn to the warmth of the boy's family and their humble way of life, he becomes entangled in their world, a world vastly different from his own. But as Ethan becomes more involved, he's forced to confront difficult choices, risking the relationships and life he once took for granted. Will he find a way to reconcile his old life with this new calling, or lose everything he holds dear? Stick around to see how one unexpected encounter can change a life forever. And if you're as intrigued by this story as we are, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments what kindness means to you. Now, let's dive into Ethan's unforgettable journey. Ethan Monroe sipped his coffee, his gaze fixed on the gleaming appliances in his spacious kitchen. Sunlight filtered through the oversized windows, casting a soft glow on the granite countertops and polished hardwood floors. Everything was impeccable, just as he liked it, neat, orderly, under control. In the silence of the morning, he scrolled through his calendar, mentally mapping out the day's agenda. There were meetings with clients, 2 conference calls with potential investors, and an evening reception that would require his presence to close a high-stakes deal. Across the kitchen, his wife, Isabella, lingered in the doorway, arms crossed and a pensive look in her eyes. Dressed in casual clothes, she looked both at home and somehow distant, as though she occupied another reality from the world of his relentless ambition. "Ethan," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, yet he could sense the tension in her tone. "Do you even remember the last time we had a weekend together? Just us and the kids?" Ethan paused, caught off guard. The question hit him as though it had materialized out of nowhere, though he knew it hadn't. He thought back, scanning his memory, trying to pinpoint the last time he'd spent an entire weekend without checking his phone or leaving for an impromptu meeting. Surely it hadn't been that long ago. But as he searched, he realized he couldn't recall a single recent weekend that had been solely for family. "Isabella, I know I've been busy," he replied, forcing a reassuring tone, although the words sounded hollow, even to him. "This is just a particularly intense quarter. After the quarter ends, things will slow down. I'll have more time for us then." She studied him, her gaze unwavering. "That's what you said last quarter, Ethan, and the quarter before that." He felt a flicker of irritation, a defensive instinct rising in him. "It's not just for me, Isabella. You know that. I'm doing this for us, for our future." Her gaze softened, but not with agreement. It was a look tinged with sadness. "And what about our present?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The weight of her question hung between them, filling the space with an uncomfortable silence. Isabella didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen. He wanted to call after her, to tell her that he was doing everything he could to provide for them, to secure a life free from worry. But the words felt inadequate. Deep down, he sensed that she needed more than what he was offering, and that thought unsettled him in a way he couldn't fully understand. Ethan's morning proceeded with the usual efficiency. Each meeting, each phone call, another piece in the complex puzzle he was constructing. Yet, Isabella's words lingered at the edges of his mind, intruding at odd moments, casting a shadow over his otherwise flawless routine. Her question replayed itself, quiet yet persistent. "What about our present?" By early afternoon, his assistant Jenny noticed his uncharacteristic distraction. She looked at him across the desk, her brows knitted in concern. "Are you all right, Mr. Monroe? You seem a bit preoccupied." Ethan blinked, pulling himself out of his thoughts. "I'm fine," he replied, brushing off her concern with a forced smile. "Just a lot on my mind." But as the afternoon wore on, he felt the weight of his own words pressing down on him. Just a lot on my mind. What had once been a simple ambition, a drive to succeed, to build, to control, had somehow become an all-consuming force, isolating him from everything that mattered. As he sat in his office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, he felt an inexplicable pull to escape, to break away from the endless cycle, if only for a day. In a moment of impulsiveness, he checked his personal email, something he rarely did during work hours. There, nestled among the usual subscription emails and social invites, was a message from Charlie, an old college friend who had moved to the countryside years ago. "Ethan, if you're tired, maybe it's time to take a detour," the subject line read. Charlie had often invited Ethan to visit his farm, telling him he could use the fresh air, the open space. But Ethan had always declined, too entrenched in his work to even consider it. Yet today, something about the invitation felt different, resonating with a part of him he'd nearly forgotten. Without overthinking it, he replied to Charlie's email, accepting the invitation. Charlie responded almost immediately with enthusiastic instructions on how to get to the farm, along with a promise of good food and even better company. The spontaneity of it felt oddly liberating, as though he'd taken the first step toward reclaiming something he'd lost. That evening, he drove home with a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of his daily obligations felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a world beyond his office walls. 2 days later, Ethan set out on the road, leaving the city behind. The landscape changed from towering skyscrapers to open fields, the air clearer, the horizon stretching wider with each mile. It had been years since he'd driven this far out of the city, and the sheer emptiness of the scenery made him feel both exposed and oddly free. As he drove, he found his thoughts drifting, untethered from the usual demands of his day. He thought of Isabella, of her quiet patience and her increasingly distant smile. He thought of his children, Lily and Andrew, whose lives had become a series of quick hellos and goodbyes, punctuated by the promise of next time. He wondered if they felt the weight of his absence, or if they had simply grown accustomed to it. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, jarring thump. The car lurched, and a shuddering vibration ran through the frame, sending his heart racing. He gripped the wheel, slowing the car to a stop on the narrow roadside, his mind still trying to process what had happened. Climbing out of the SUV, he walked around to inspect the damage. One of the rear tires had blown, the rubber torn and frayed. He groaned, feeling a surge of frustration. Out here, miles from anywhere, he had no immediate solution. He glanced at his phone, but the screen showed no signal. He was completely isolated. As he stood there, staring at the shredded tire, a memory surfaced unbidden. He was 16, driving his father's old car, when it had broken down on the side of a rural road. He remembered the hours he'd spent waiting, hoping someone would stop and help. Instead, car after car had passed him by, each one a reminder of his own helplessness. The memory left a bitter taste in his mouth, and he forced himself to push it aside. But as he looked around, the weight of his isolation pressed down on him, and he felt that same helplessness return. In his world, inconveniences like this were handled by assistants, by service calls, by the luxury of not needing to know how things worked. Out here, he was just another stranded traveler, alone and vulnerable. Ethan was on the verge of considering the long walk back when he noticed a figure in the distance, a speck against the vast expanse of the road. As the figure came closer, he saw that it was a young boy, riding an old, weather-beaten bicycle. The boy was perhaps 14, dressed in a faded t-shirt and jeans, his face tanned from the sun. The boy slowed as he approached, stopping a few feet from Ethan. "Hey, mister," he called out, a curious glint in his eyes. "Looks like you've got a flat." Ethan managed a smile, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to fix it." The boy nodded, dismounting his bike and walking over to inspect the damage. "I can help," he said confidently. "My dad showed me how to change a tire last summer." Ethan hesitated, glancing at the boy with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Are you sure?" The boy grinned, rolling his eyes good-naturedly. "Yeah, it's not that hard. You got a spare?" Ethan nodded, leading him to the back of the SUV. The boy worked quickly, handling the tools with an ease that surprised him. As he loosened the lug nuts and adjusted the jack, Ethan found himself watching with a mixture of awe and humility. This kid, who had so little, was helping him without a second thought. "You're really doing this," he murmured, more to himself than to the boy. The boy glanced up, giving him a reassuring smile. "It's just a tire, mister. No big deal." For Ethan, though, it was a big deal. He hadn't experienced a simple act of kindness in a long time. Everything in his world came with a price, an expectation, a return on investment. But this boy was helping him simply because he could, and the purity of that gesture left him feeling both grateful and unmoored. When the job was done, Ethan reached into his wallet, pulling out a crisp bill and holding it out to the boy. "Here," he said, feeling a strange need to compensate the boy for his time. But the boy shook his head, taking a step back. "Nah, I don't need that," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Just wanted to help." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the boy's refusal. "Are you sure?" The boy nodded, his smile never wavering. "Take care, mister," he said, climbing back onto his bike. "Good luck with wherever you're going." With that, he pedaled off, leaving Ethan standing alone on the roadside, the bill still clutched in his hand. He watched until the boy disappeared over the horizon, a strange sense of warmth mingling with a hollow ache in his chest. As he climbed back into the SUV and resumed his drive, he couldn't shake the memory of the boy's smile, the easy generosity with which he'd offered his help. In a world where everything was transactional, the boy's refusal had unsettled him, challenging the assumptions he'd built his life around. For the rest of the drive, Ethan's thoughts were a jumble of conflicting emotions, a quiet yearning for something he couldn't quite define. By the time Ethan arrived home, the day had faded into evening, the house bathed in the golden light of dusk. He parked in the driveway, glancing up at the familiar facade of his home, a place he'd once considered a symbol of his achievements, of everything he'd worked so hard to build. Yet tonight, it felt strangely empty, as though it were merely a shell devoid of warmth. Inside, Isabella was waiting in the foyer, her expression softening when she saw him. "You're back early," she noted, her voice tinged with curiosity. "I had a flat tire," he replied, setting his keys on the table. "Some kid helped me fix it." Her eyes widened, a hint of surprise crossing her face. "Really? You don't hear about that much anymore?" Ethan nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He wouldn't even take money for it. Just did it and left. Isabella's gaze softened, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "It's nice to know there are still people like that out there," she said quietly. He wanted to explain the impact the encounter had had on him, the way it had unsettled him, opened a door he hadn't known existed. But as he looked into Isabella's eyes, he felt a surge of defensiveness, an instinct to downplay the encounter. "Yeah," he murmured, brushing past her. "Just a kid helping out." But as he walked through the quiet rooms of his home, the memory lingered, pressing in on him, refusing to be dismissed. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the boy's face etched into his mind. The easy way he'd smiled, the unspoken kindness in his gesture, these were things Ethan hadn't encountered in years, a simplicity that felt almost foreign. He realized with a pang that he couldn't simply let it go. Something about the encounter had awakened a restlessness in him, a hunger for connection, for meaning beyond the walls of his office and the relentless pursuit of success. And so, as he drifted into a fitful sleep, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would find the boy again, not to repay him, but to understand what had driven him to help a stranger without expectation. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of something real, a pull toward a new path, a chance to uncover what he'd lost. Days passed, but Ethan couldn't shake the memory of his encounter with the boy on the country road. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Ryan's face, the easy grin, the unself-conscious kindness in his eyes. It felt like a thread pulling at him, unspooling some part of himself he'd long buried. He wanted to push the thoughts aside, to focus on his work, his responsibilities, but they clung to him like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. The need to return, to see the boy again, became an almost involuntary impulse, pressing at him during moments of quiet. Eventually, he decided, one afternoon, after another long day of meetings and closed-door negotiations, he canceled his evening appointments and left the city without a word, heading back toward the stretch of road where he'd first encountered Ryan. Ethan had no plan, no idea of what he might say or do if he found the boy again. All he knew was that he needed to understand what had driven Ryan to help him so readily, with no expectation of anything in return. He drove slowly, his eyes scanning the fields, the lone houses spaced widely apart, until he spotted a small property nestled back from the road. He recognized the porch swing, the sagging fence, and the weathered boards of the modest house. The sight stirred a mixture of anticipation and trepidation, and he felt his heart quicken as he pulled into the driveway. The house looked humble, but lived in, the front yard dotted with scattered toys and a small vegetable garden in the corner. As he stepped out of the car, he couldn't help but feel like an intruder, a polished suit against a backdrop of simple country life. But before he could second-guess himself, the front door opened, and a woman stepped out. She looked to be in her late 30s, with warm brown eyes and a gentle yet discerning expression. Her gaze settled on him with quiet curiosity, and he felt a sudden rush of nerves. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. Ethan cleared his throat, feeling uncharacteristically self-conscious. "Yes, actually, I'm looking for a boy. I think his name is Ryan. He helped me with a flat tire on the road last week, and I just wanted to thank him properly." The woman's face softened, and a hint of a smile touched her lips. "You must be the man with the SUV," she said, amusement glinting in her eyes. "I'm Emily, Ryan's mom. Company's just out back." Ethan followed her inside, taking in the warmth and simplicity of the house. The walls were adorned with family photos, each one capturing moments of laughter and shared joy. The scent of something freshly baked lingered in the air, and he felt an odd pang of nostalgia for a home life he hadn't known in years. "Ryan," Emily called out, her voice carrying through the open windows. A moment later, Ryan appeared, his face lighting up when he recognized Ethan. "Hey, mister," he greeted, his grin as open and genuine as ever. "Did the tire hold up?" Ethan chuckled, feeling the last of his nervousness melt away. "It did, and thank you really. I don't know what I would have done without you." Ryan shrugged, his expression easygoing. "It was nothing, just a tire, right?" But to Ethan, it had been more than that. Much more. He felt a sudden urge to repay the kindness, to give back something in return. "I was wondering if there's anything I can help you with here, around the farm. I don't know much about fixing things, but I can learn." Ryan looked at him, surprised but delighted. He turned to his mother, who studied Ethan with an assessing gaze. After a moment, she smiled and nodded. "Well, we're always working on something around here. You're welcome to lend a hand if you like." And so, for the first time in years, Ethan found himself rolling up his sleeves and spending the afternoon outdoors, working alongside Ryan and his mother. They mended the broken fence, cleared weeds from the garden, and repaired a loose step on the porch. Each task was small, simple, but as he worked, he felt a strange contentment settle over him. The quiet satisfaction of physical labor filled a part of him he hadn't realized was empty. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields, Ethan was exhausted yet fulfilled. Emily invited him to stay for dinner, and he accepted, feeling more at home with these strangers than he had in his own house for a long time. The kitchen was filled with the scent of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread, a comforting aroma that seemed to wrap around Ethan like a warm blanket. He sat at the kitchen table, watching as Emily set out plates, her movements unhurried and practiced. Ryan and his younger sister, Maggie, who looked to be about 8, bustled around, helping in their own ways, their laughter echoing softly in the small space. Ethan observed the way they interacted, the easy familiarity between them, the unspoken language of a family that knew each other well. It was a stark contrast to the formal, quiet dinners he shared with his own family, where conversation often felt like an obligation rather than a joy. "So, what brings you back here, mister?" Ryan asked as he handed Ethan a plate, his curiosity evident. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "I guess I wanted to know what made you stop that day. Most people wouldn't have bothered." Ryan shrugged, a simple smile on his face. "It's just what you do. My dad always said, if you can help someone, you should. Doesn't matter who they are." The words struck Ethan with an unexpected force, a reminder of values he'd once held but had allowed to slip away in the pursuit of ambition. The idea of helping for the sake of helping, without expecting anything in return, it was something he hadn't encountered in years. As they ate, The conversation flowed easily, filled with stories of the farm, of Ryan's dreams of studying engineering someday, and Maggie's ambitious plans to become a veterinarian for all the animals, especially the fluffy ones. Ethan found himself laughing, a genuine, unrestrained laugh that felt foreign, yet wonderfully freeing. Emily watched him with a kind smile, her gaze thoughtful. "It's nice having someone new around here. We don't get a lot of visitors, and it's always good to share a meal." Ethan nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude. "Thank you for having me. It's refreshing." And it was. As he looked around the table, at the faces of this family who had welcomed him without question, he felt an unfamiliar warmth settle over him, a sense of belonging that hadn't touched him in years. When the meal ended, Ethan reluctantly rose to leave, thanking them once more. He promised to return soon, though he wasn't entirely sure why. All he knew was that he wasn't ready to let go of the connection he'd found here, the fleeting sense of peace he'd stumbled upon. As he drove back to the city, the house faded in the rearview mirror, but the feeling lingered, filling a place in his heart he hadn't known was empty. The following days felt surreal. Ethan went through the motions at work, attending meetings, finalizing deals, and managing his team, but his mind kept drifting back to the farm. The simplicity, the warmth, the sense of purpose he'd felt, it was a stark contrast to the relentless drive and empty successes that had come to define his life. Each time he recalled the evening with Ryan's family, he felt a longing, a restlessness he couldn't quite explain. The memory clung to him, a whisper that urged him to return, to immerse himself in the world he'd glimpsed. By the weekend, he found himself driving back to the farm without hesitation. When he arrived, Ryan was out in the yard, tinkering with a broken fence post, his face lighting up when he saw Ethan. "Back again, huh?" he teased, his grin infectious. Ethan chuckled, feeling his own smile widen. "Couldn't stay away." Emily greeted him warmly, offering him a cup of coffee as they settled into the rhythm of the day's tasks. There was no rush, no urgency, only the satisfaction of each small accomplishment: the repaired fence, the weeded garden, the fresh coat of paint on the barn. As he worked, Ethan felt a quiet contentment fill him, a sense of purpose that transcended his usual goals of profit and achievement. Here, there were no high-stakes deals, no pressing deadlines, only the tangible, honest work that connected him to something real. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table once more, sharing stories and laughter, Ethan realized that he was becoming a part of their lives, just as they were becoming a part of his. He felt a deepening attachment to them, a desire to protect, to support, to give back in a way that felt genuine. But as Ethan's attachment to the farm grew, so did the strain on his personal life. Each time he returned home, he felt a growing disconnect, a distance between him and his family that seemed impossible to bridge. Isabella, who had once been his confidant, his partner in everything, now seemed to inhabit a world he no longer understood. One evening, after another late return from the farm, Isabella met him in the foyer, her expression weary and troubled. "Ethan, I don't know what's going on with you, but I feel like you're slipping away," she said, her voice filled with frustration and hurt. He took a deep breath, trying to find the words to explain. "It's complicated, Isabella. I found something out there, something that makes me feel alive." "Alive?" she repeated, her voice edged with disbelief. "And what about us, Ethan? What about your family?" Her words cut through him, piercing the bubble of detachment he'd built around himself. He looked at her, realizing, with a painful clarity, that he was caught between two worlds, each pulling him in opposite directions. "I don't have the answers, Isabella. All I know is there's something out there I can't let go of." She shook her head, her gaze filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Well, Ethan, maybe it's time you decided what really matters to you." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the quiet of their home, the weight of her words settling heavily over him. For the first time, he felt the full impact of his choices, the silent toll they'd taken on his family. He was on the verge of losing everything he'd built, yet he couldn't turn back. The pull of Ryan's world, the simplicity, the unfiltered kindness, was something he couldn't ignore. and he didn't know if he was willing to let it go. As the weeks passed, Ethan's visits to the farm became more frequent, a ritual that seemed to define his existence. He worked tirelessly alongside Ryan and Emily, feeling a sense of purpose in each task, each conversation. But the more time he spent there, the more his own life began to feel like a facade, an empty shell of success. At work, he found himself disengaged, going through the motions without the drive that had once propelled him forward. He began turning down invitations to social events, preferring the quiet, meaningful moments he found at the farm over the superficiality of his usual circles. But his obsession came at a cost. His relationship with Isabella deteriorated further, the silence between them growing heavier with each passing day. She didn't ask where he was going, and he didn't offer an explanation. They were living parallel lives, each one haunted by unspoken truths. Ethan knew that he was reaching a breaking point, that he could no longer live in the space between two worlds. But the thought of choosing, of letting go of either his family or the connection he'd found with Ryan, felt impossible. For now, he clung to both, hoping against hope that he could reconcile the two, even as he sensed the inevitability of the choice he would soon have to make. Ethan's double life became more pronounced as the weeks wore on. By day, he was still Ethan Monroe, the high-powered executive, the man whose decisions held weight in boardrooms and whose presence commanded respect. But as soon as he left the city and drove out toward the farm, he felt himself transform into someone else, a version of himself that he hadn't known in years, unburdened by the pressures and demands of his usual life. Yet the strain of maintaining this balance was taking its toll. At work, he was losing focus, his mind drifting during meetings, his energy sapped by his internal conflict. His colleagues noticed the change, exchanging glances when he missed deadlines or brushed off project details he would have once micromanaged. Ethan sensed their concern, but he ignored it, too absorbed in his thoughts to care about the whispers around him. But the real cost was felt at home. Each time he returned, Isabella's gaze grew colder, her words fewer and laced with an edge that made it clear she no longer recognized the man she'd married. The air between them was tense, and even his attempts to bridge the gap, small gestures like bringing home her favorite flowers or cooking breakfast for the kids, fell flat. The warmth that had once defined their relationship was gone, replaced by a quiet but growing resentment that he could feel in every silent dinner, every indifferent goodnight. One evening, as they sat in their bedroom, Isabella finally spoke up, her voice tense but controlled. "Ethan, we can't keep living like this. You're here, but it's like you're 1,000 miles away." Ethan looked at her, struggling to find the words to explain. I'm trying to find balance, Isabella. There's something I found out there, something I didn't know I needed." Her expression didn't soften. "And what about us? What about the life we've built? Am I supposed to just watch while you slip further away?" He wanted to reach out, to reassure her, but he didn't know how. He felt like he was standing on a precipice, one world pulling him forward while the other anchored him in place. But as he looked in her eyes, he saw the hurt and frustration he'd been trying to ignore, and he knew that something had to give. "I don't know," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll figure it out. I promise." She looked at him for a long moment, a sadness settling into her features. "I hope you do, Ethan, because I can't keep waiting forever." With that, she turned away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that he was on the verge of losing everything he held dear. Despite the turmoil at home, Ethan continued to return to the farm, feeling drawn to the simplicity and warmth he found there. He became a regular presence, helping with chores, sharing meals, and becoming a part of their daily lives in a way that felt more genuine than anything he'd experienced in years. Ryan looked up to him, and Ethan found himself taking on the role of mentor, teaching the boys skills he'd never thought he'd pass on, feeling a quiet pride in each small accomplishment they shared. One evening, as they sat around the kitchen table after a long day of work, Emily looked at him with a gentle smile. "It's been a long time since we've had someone who's stuck around," she said softly. "We're glad to have you here, Ethan." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of belonging that resonated deeply. But even as he smiled back, he sensed a flicker of doubt, a quiet reminder that this life wasn't truly his, that he was only a visitor in their world. The following week, a severe storm hit the area, the kind that uprooted trees and battered buildings with relentless force. When Ethan arrived at the farm the next morning, he was greeted by the sight of their barn, half collapsed from the weight of a fallen tree, the supplies inside ruined. Emily's face was pale, her voice shaky as she explained the damage. "We lost nearly everything stored for the winter," she murmured. "I don't know how we're going to recover." The worry in her eyes cut through him, and without a second thought, he offered to help. "I'll cover the costs, Emily. We can rebuild the barn, replace the supplies, whatever you need." But she shook her head, her pride evident despite her desperation. "You've done so much for us already, Ethan. We don't want charity. We've always managed on our own." Ethan felt a surge of frustration, the need to protect and provide battling with her determination to remain independent. He wanted to insist, to make her understand that he wasn't just offering charity, that he truly cared. But he realized that pushing would only alienate her, and so he forced himself to hold back, the helplessness gnawing at him. As he helped them clean up the debris, he felt the weight of his limitations, the painful truth that he couldn't fix everything. He was used to controlling his world, to bending circumstances to his will. But here, faced with the raw realities of their life, he felt humbled, aware of the boundaries that separated him from them. That evening, as he left the farm, he felt a heaviness settle over him, a reminder that he was merely a visitor in their world, unable to change it in any lasting way. As Ethan's attachment to the farm deepened, his relationship with Isabella deteriorated further. Each return home felt like stepping into a world he no longer understood, a life that felt more like a costume he wore rather than a reality he lived. The silences grew longer, the conversations shorter, and the tension between them simmered just below the surface, threatening to spill over at any moment. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, their children chattering about their day, Isabella finally confronted him. "Ethan, I can't keep pretending everything's fine," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know who you are anymore. You're here, but you're not here." He looked at her, seeing the pain in her eyes, the quiet desperation that he'd chosen to ignore. "Isabella, it's not that simple. I'm trying to find something real, something that gives me purpose." "And what about us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Aren't we real enough for you?" Her words cut through him, and he felt the weight of his choices settle heavily on his shoulders. He didn't have an answer, and in that moment he saw the truth in her eyes that she was already halfway gone, slipping further away with each day he spent chasing something he couldn't define. The realization left him hollow, and as she turned away, he knew that he was standing on the edge of a precipice, one misstep away from losing everything he held dear. In the days that followed, Ethan felt a growing urgency to set things right, both at home and at the farm. He was determined to find a way to help Emily without overstepping, to offer support without compromising her independence. After hours of research and phone calls, he managed to locate a grant program that aided struggling farms, and he filled out the application on their behalf, hoping it would be enough to help them rebuild. But even as he worked to support them, he felt the distance between him and his own family widening. Isabella was polite but distant, her warmth replaced by a quiet resignation that left him feeling isolated in his own home. His children seemed to sense the tension, their laughter quieter, their conversations subdued. He was losing them, he realized slowly but surely, as he poured himself into a world that wasn't truly his. One night, he found himself staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, the lines of worry etched into his face, a stark reminder of the toll his choices had taken. He barely recognized the man staring back at him, the stranger who had once been driven by ambition and success, now lost in a sea of conflicting desires and unmet needs. For the first time, he wondered if he had been chasing an illusion, a fleeting sense of purpose that had only served to unravel everything he'd built. The next morning, as Ethan prepared to leave for the farm, Isabella stopped him at the door, her expression calm but resolute. "Ethan, this has to end," she said quietly. "You need to decide what matters to you, this life, this family, or whatever it is you're chasing out there." He looked at her, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He knew that he was at a crossroads, that the time for excuses and half-truths had come to an end. "I need to say goodbye," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need closure." She studied him, her eyes filled with a sadness he couldn't bear. "Then go," she said softly. "But when you come back, Ethan, you need to be here. All of you." As he drove away, her words echoed in his mind, a reminder that he was on borrowed time, that the life he'd taken for granted was slipping away with each mile. When Ethan arrived at the farm, he felt a profound sadness settle over him, a sense of finality that he hadn't expected. He spent the day with Ryan and Emily, helping them with the last of the repairs, sharing stories and laughter that felt bittersweet, knowing this would be his last visit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he gathered them together, his heart heavy with gratitude and regret. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You've given me more than I can ever repay." Emily looked at him, her expression understanding. "You'll always be welcome here, Ethan. This will always be your home." Ryan hugged him tightly, his voice filled with quiet emotion. "You've been like a father to me, mister. I'll never forget you." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat, and he held the boy tightly, feeling the weight of everything he was leaving behind. As he climbed into his car and drove away, he knew that he was closing a chapter of his life, leaving behind a part of himself he'd only just begun to understand. When Ethan arrived home, he found Isabella waiting for him, her gaze wary but hopeful. He took her hand, his voice steady. "I'm here," he said, his words filled with a quiet resolve. "I'm not going anywhere." They stood in silence, their hands entwined, a fragile beginning in the wreckage of what they'd nearly lost. For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of his choices lift, replaced by a sense of purpose that grounded him in the life he'd almost walked away from. In the days following his last visit to the farm, Ethan dedicated himself fully to restoring his relationships at home. He knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to heal the rift he had created, so he committed himself to action, rebuilding trust through consistent, intentional effort. He started by spending more time with Isabella, not just in shared routines, but in meaningful conversations they had neglected over the years. He asked her about her passions, her thoughts, and the dreams she'd set aside for the sake of their family. At first, she responded with cautious skepticism, but over time, she began to open up, her initial hesitation replaced by a quiet warmth he hadn't seen in years. With his children, he took a similar approach, immersing himself in their lives in ways he hadn't before. He attended Andrew's soccer games, cheering from the sidelines with an enthusiasm that surprised even him. He joined Lily in her art projects, letting her teach him to draw despite his lack of skill. These moments were small, seemingly ordinary, but they filled him with a deep satisfaction, a sense of connection that transcended words. And as the days turned into weeks, the changes became evident. The house, once filled with a quiet tension, grew warm again, the laughter and easy conversation returning little by little. Ethan felt a sense of gratitude and relief, knowing that he was finally reclaiming the life he'd nearly lost. While Ethan was committed to restoring his relationships at home, he couldn't forget the impact Ryan and Emily had had on his life. He wanted to honor them, to give back in a way that respected their independence while offering support. After days of research, he came across several programs that provided sustainable assistance to small farms, including grants for equipment and training that would help Ryan's family thrive long-term. He spent evenings filling out applications on their behalf, gathering resources, and reaching out to contacts in agricultural support networks. Each task was a way to express his gratitude, a chance to offer something lasting without overstepping. Finally, he compiled all the information into a neatly organized packet, including a personal letter to Emily. "Dear Emily, thank you for everything you and your family have shown me. I hope this information is helpful and that it can provide a way forward. This isn't charity. It's a thank you for letting me be part of your world. I'll always be grateful for the lessons you taught me, the kindness you offered, and the home you shared. With gratitude, Ethan." He sent it with a quiet hope that it would reach them with the same sincerity in which it was sent. As he mailed the packet, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he was honoring their friendship in a way that respected their dignity and independence. Returning to his professional life, Ethan found that his perspective on work had shifted. Where he'd once pursued wealth and power for their own sake, he now felt a need to align his career with values of integrity, service, and connection. He began looking at his projects and clients with a critical eye, prioritizing those that brought value beyond profit alone. He initiated a mentorship program within his company, offering support and guidance to younger employees, sharing the lessons he'd learned about balance and purpose. For the first time, he felt that his work could be a force for good, not just a means to an end. The changes weren't immediate, but over time, he noticed a positive shift in his team's morale and the culture within his firm. His colleagues responded to his new approach, and his days were filled with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet fulfillment that resonated deeply. One crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived from Ryan. The handwriting was slightly uneven, the words carefully printed. As he opened the envelope, Ethan felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude. "Dear Mr. Monroe," it began, "thank you for everything you did for us. The grant came through, and we were able to rebuild the barn and get the supplies we needed. Mom says it's like a miracle, but I know it's all because of you. I still want to be an engineer someday, and now I know it's possible. You showed me that you don't have to have everything to make a difference, you just have to care. I'll never forget you, and I hope one day I can help someone the way you helped us. With gratitude, Ryan." Ethan read the letter twice, then a third time, the words filling him with a profound sense of pride and humility. Ryan's gratitude was a reminder of the impact of small kindnesses, the power of connection to transform lives in ways he hadn't imagined. He shared the letter with Isabella, who smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You did a good thing, Ethan," she said softly. "You made a difference." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "I think they made a difference in me, too." Inspired by Ryan's letter, Ethan decided to share the experience with his family. He suggested a visit to the farm, wanting Isabella, Lily, and Andrew to meet the family who had changed his life. Isabella agreed, and together, they planned a weekend trip to the countryside. The drive out was filled with anticipation, and when they arrived, Ryan and Emily greeted them with open arms. The farm looked more vibrant than ever, the barn rebuilt, the fields rich with the autumn harvest. The children took to each other immediately, playing in the fields, sharing stories, and laughing together as though they'd known each other for years. Emily prepared a hearty meal, and they all gathered around the table, the air filled with warmth and laughter. For Ethan, the evening was a profound moment of connection, a blending of his two worlds that felt both natural and transformative. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the fields, he felt an overwhelming sense of contentment, a peace he hadn't known in years. This was what he'd been searching for, not success, not recognition, but the quiet joy of shared moments, the fulfillment of being part of something greater than himself. After that first visit, Ethan made it a tradition to return to the farm with his family each season. Each visit brought new memories, deeper bonds, and a renewed appreciation for the simplicity and beauty of a life lived with purpose and integrity. They celebrated the harvest, helped with planting in the spring, and shared in the hard work of summer, each visit a reminder of the values that had come to define Ethan's life. With each trip, he felt himself grow closer to his own family as well, the shared experiences strengthening their connection and bringing them closer than they'd ever been. The children loved their time on the farm, and Isabella, too, found solace in the quiet rhythms of country life. For Ethan, the visits were a source of joy, a way to ground himself in the life he'd nearly lost, and a reminder of the transformation he'd undergone. Years passed, and the farm continued to thrive, with Ryan growing into a young man with dreams of studying engineering and a heart full of gratitude for the stranger who had once helped him. Ethan, too, grew in ways he hadn't anticipated, his life now a blend of ambition and purpose, success and connection. He remained committed to his family, his work, and his community, using his resources and influence to support causes that aligned with his values. The legacy he built was one of kindness and integrity, a life measured not in wealth but in the impact he'd made on the lives around him. One autumn evening, as he sat on the porch of his own home, watching his children play in the yard, he felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. The journey he'd taken had been long, marked by loss and redemption, but it had led him to a place of peace, a place where he belonged. In the distance, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He thought of Ryan, of Emily, of the lessons they had taught him, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had found. As he stood, Isabella joined him, slipping her hand into his. They watched the sunset together, their hands entwined, their hearts bound by the journey they had taken. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, Ethan knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by family, grounded in purpose, and at peace with the life he'd built. A year passed since that first family visit to the farm, and life moved forward in quiet but meaningful ways. Ethan had become a familiar face around the local community near the farm, welcomed by neighbors and friends of Ryan's family. Each visit brought a new layer of connection, and Ethan felt like an honorary member of their world. He supported the farm discreetly by connecting Emily with local cooperatives, giving them access to better resources and support networks. Back in the city, he found new ways to bring the values he'd learned into his work. His mentorship program expanded, and he began organizing community outreach projects within his company, encouraging employees to volunteer in under-resourced areas. He no longer measured success by his own achievements, but by the positive influence he could create in others' lives. During one visit, Ryan surprised Ethan with a quiet request to visit his office in the city. His voice had grown deeper with age, his confidence strengthened by the guidance he'd received from Ethan. "I want to see what it's like," he explained. "To see what you do, what's possible." Ethan felt a surge of pride as he brought Ryan to his office, showing him the intricacies of business operations and introducing him to his colleagues. By the end of the day, Ryan's eyes sparkled with excitement, a hint of the future he was beginning to envision for himself. "You've got what it takes, Ryan," Ethan told him as they stood together, looking out at the city skyline. "You just need to keep believing in yourself." Ryan nodded, his gaze steady. "I want to help others the way you helped us," he said. "I want to make a difference." Ethan knew then that the seeds of kindness he had planted had taken root, growing into something that would endure beyond his own life. The legacy he was building wasn't just for him. It was for everyone whose lives he'd touched and for those they, in turn, would go on to help. On a chilly winter evening, Ethan found himself alone in his study, reflecting on the twists and turns that had brought him here. He opened his desk drawer and found the letter Ryan had written him, now slightly worn from being read and reread. As he ran his fingers over the familiar words, he felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. In that quiet moment, he thought of the man he had once been, the ambitious, restless version of himself who had believed that success lay in wealth and power. The journey had taught him that true fulfillment came from simpler, quieter moments, a shared meal, a child's laughter, the satisfaction of helping others without expecting anything in return. Ethan knew he was no longer the man he once was. He had grown into someone who valued connection, family, and kindness above all else. The material wealth he had once pursued felt almost insignificant in comparison to the richness he'd found in relationships and purpose. As he sat there, a smile spread across his face. He knew that his life had meaning, not because of what he had acquired, but because of the lives he had touched. And in that quiet satisfaction, he found a peace that he knew would last. Months later, during one of their family visits to the farm, Ethan called Ryan aside, holding a small, well-wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, handing it over with a smile. Ryan took the package, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, its pages blank and ready to be filled. He looked up, his expression one of surprise and curiosity. "It's a journal," Ethan explained. "A place to write down your thoughts, your plans, your dreams. One day, you'll look back and see just how far you've come." Ryan nodded, visibly moved. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I'll make sure it's put to good use." As Ryan walked back to join his family, Ethan watched him, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude for the young man he had grown to love like a son. in that moment. He knew that the future was bright not only for Ryan, but for the legacy of kindness and compassion they had created together. Years later, on a warm spring evening, Ethan sat on the front porch of his home, now graying at the temples, watching as his own children, Lily and Andrew, played in the yard. They had grown into thoughtful, compassionate young adults, inspired by the life he had built around them. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the yard, Andrew joined him, sitting down with a soft sigh. "Dad," he began, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "Tell me again about the boy who changed your life." Ethan chuckled, a soft smile crossing his face. "I've told you that story 100 times, son." "I know," Andrew replied with a grin, "but it never gets old." And so, Ethan shared the story once more, recounting how a simple act of kindness on a deserted road had led him on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. He spoke of Ryan, of Emily, and of the farm, of the values they'd taught him and the lessons he'd learned about love, humility, and purpose. As he spoke, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his legacy would live on through his children and through the kindness they would one day pass on to others. The stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, and as Ethan looked out at the world, he felt a profound peace. He knew that his life had been meaningful, that he had loved well and given generously. And as he sat with his son, sharing stories of the past, he felt a quiet certainty that the journey of kindness and connection he had begun would continue for generations to come. With that thought, Ethan leaned back, his heart full, and watched as the stars filled the sky, knowing that he had found his way home in every sense of the word. As Ethan's journey ends, we're reminded of the powerful impact of kindness, family, and finding purpose beyond material success. If you enjoyed this story of transformation, connection, and the legacy of compassion, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss more inspiring stories just like this one. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the simplest act of kindness can change a life.